Bare necessity, but simple bare necessity. Bare necessity, but simple bare necessity.
Hey there, it's Brie Bear, and welcome to the first of a few videos of me catching up. Y'all, it has been crazy. And I have had a difficult time. Mentally speaking, I've had a couple of setbacks. As well as in work and just in general. I've had several videos that I've filmed and just lost motivation there when it came to editing, and I also kind of fell off the wagon when it came to doing individual videos for my first time completing the Hunger Games videos, which was supposed to be coming out, and having that not come out kind of set me back quite a bit. But I do have a plan to kind of do an alternative version of that video, or of those videos as one. First, I'm going to be trying to get caught up on my wrap-ups, and that means that I have 2 bi-monthly wrap-ups that I am behind on, which means I'm 4 months off schedule. Unfortunately. So this video is for March and April of this year. Everything that I read and all of that. So first let's go ahead and get into my statistics for everything. So first we're going to start with statistics. So I read a total of 15 books, and over those 15 books I read a total of 3,395 pages. Only 2 of those books were rereads. The rest were first time reads. As far as age ranges go, I read 3 children's books, 0 middle grade, 6 YA, and 6 adult. 8 of the books that I read were read digitally. 1 of them was an audiobook, 0 were ebooks, 7 of them were PDFs for audiobooks, and the other 7 books that I read were read physically. 13 of those books were prose, 1 was poetry or verse, and 1 was a graphic novel or manga. To star ratings, I had no 1 stars, praise bless. I did have 1 2-star. I had 8 3-star, 3 4-star, and 3 5-star. Next we're going to get into genres, and for that I'm going to read it off. One that I categorized as classic, it's kind of a weird one. We'll get into that in a minute. We had 1 historical romance, 1 dystopian, 3 nonfiction, 3 contemporary, and 5 fantasy. Now we're going to move on into each individual book. I am going to try to keep this shorter than my past few wrap-ups have been, because it's been a pain to edit and I've been putting it off, and so I want to make it to where I'm going to be more likely to edit it while still keeping in as much information as I can for you guys. The first book I completed is called Small Business. This is by Armani Murphy. It is a 2020 adult nonfiction that I did the PDF for the audiobook for, and it's written in prose. Basically what it sounds like from the title, it's a quick guide to the basics of starting a small business. My dislikes, I just wanted more. And as far as what I liked was that the information that you were provided was indeed good. I rated this 4 stars. The next book that I completed was Startup by Armani Murphy. Again, 2020 adult nonfiction, and again, PDF for the audiobook narration. I did, of course, narrate the audiobook for this as well. This is kind of a quick breakdown of the lean startup method and how to kind of implement that. Again, I wanted more information. I wanted more out of this book, but the information that was provided was good. I would be interested in reading more of Armani Murphy's works. The next book that I completed was Jane Steele by Lindsay Faye. This came out in 2016. It's an adult kind of sort of a mystery, but it's kind of hard to categorize. I'll talk about it a little bit more in a second. It was a reread for me, and I read this through audiobook. For diversity representation, we have LGBTQ and racial, specifically Asian. As far as trigger warnings, there's quite a list. Let me read it off for you. We have cutting, absent father, suicide, drug abuse, loss of parent, sexual abuse, blackmail, domestic violence, loss of a child, incest, cheating, murder, and kind of the weight of the parent's sin being placed on the child or children. As far as controversial topics, we have sexual content. Kind of an interesting way that it's put in here, honestly, but just know that that is a part of this book, is that there is some content that leans sexually focused. So let's move into our archetypes, themes, tropes. This is a retelling and it includes serial killing. So that may be something you're into. I don't know. I don't know your life. Okay, so special note is this is a retelling of Jane Eyre. If you don't know, I'm going through and I reread Jane Eyre back in November, December of last year. And I am going through and reading a bunch of retellings of Jane Eyre, and then I'm going to kind of compare and contrast them, take notes, and kind of just talk about that once I get through all the ones that are on my list of ones that I want to read. If you have any suggestions for any, go ahead and leave them in the comments below. I'm actually currently reading one for that list, but I'm not going to tell you which one. So, synopsis. Basically, this follows Jane Steele, who really loves the story of Jane Eyre. She really loves that story because she feels very connected to Jane. She feels like she really relates, not just because of her name, but because of her life story and circumstances kind of paralleling that of Jane Eyre's in some ways. But there are some big differences though. And the main one being that Jane Steele is a serial killer. So it's really an interesting twist on the story. I don't know what to categorize it as though, because it is kind of mystery-esque in some ways, but it's also kind of thriller-esque in some ways. It's kind of one of those that you just don't know where to put it. But it fits in that mystery thriller kind of space, but it doesn't specifically fall into one or the other. A lot of things that were changed throughout the story for the retelling version I didn't necessarily hate and I didn't necessarily love. They were just kind of neutral for me. So that was really the only neutral thoughts. Everything else is kind of leaning positive or negative for me. Okay, so of course there were retelling changes that did lean negative for me. Okay, so my thing about this particular book is I really love the concept of Jane as a serial killer. I really love that idea. However, I just have some things that I really dislike about the execution, and particularly as far as the retelling elements go and as far as the execution goes. I really hate the way that the Thornfield sections are done. And I also feel like a lot was taken away in regards to our relationship development. We did not get enough of that. The narration itself I felt like was really well done. And there are some really good lines throughout the story that I didn't end up rating this 3 stars. So the next book that I completed was Anger is a Gift by Mark Ashuro. It's a 2018 YA contemporary that I read physically, and this I started during Contemporary-thon, but due to some craziness that happened with my work, I was not able to complete it during that time. Also has a very long list of trigger warnings, representation things, all of those things, so I'm going to look down for that as well. Okay, so as far as diversity and representation goes, every single character is diverse in some way, so I just kind of put dash various for like everything because it was usually various. LGBTQ various, racial various, spiritual various, mental illness, adoption, chronic illness, and taking medication for chronic illness, epilepsy, and being bilingual were all represented within the story. Trigger warnings is a long list. I'm going to read that off too. Police brutality, panic attacks, gun violence, drug abuse and drug dealing, depression, chronic illness, prescribed medication, epilepsy, body hate and possible BDD, grief and loss, drunk driving, car accidents, anxiety, blood, choking, and gang activity. Yeah. Okay, and then there is still another long list to give you guys, and that is the controversial topics, which I don't have to give a lot of throughout my readings, but this one is insanely long. Black Lives Matter, police brutality, religion and LGBTQ within religion, inner city schools, illegal immigration, marijuana, gang activity, suicidal thoughts, sexual harassment. Suicidal thoughts is in the wrong category. That should be in trigger warnings. My bad. Sexual harassment should also be in the other category. Sorry about that. And death of a pregnant woman should also be in the other category. Sorry about that. Don't know what happened there. Archetypes and themes. So we have Black Lives Matter movement, inner city schools, learning body confidence, working through grief and loss, and mental illness as well. I'm going to read off my synopsis. Moss deals with mental illness and a school that's falling apart even before the brutality sets in, and rocks the world of this inner city community. So that is the synopsis that I wrote myself. I write all my synopses. But let's go ahead and get into my likes and dislikes for this one, because wow, was this an experience. So part of the reason why this took so long to read was simply because of the topics covered. And I read this before the recent events within the Black Lives Matter movement and all of that. So it makes it even harder to talk about how I feel about this book. I just feel like some of the conversations were not addressed well in the book. Basically, all in all, the things that I disliked about this book were simply just some of the presentation of things and some of the way that things were played out wasn't the most beneficial. Okay, let's move on to the things that I did like. Some of the conversations that were brought up outside of the Black Lives Matter thing, which is an important conversation and is the main conversation of the book. So, you know, the reason I'm mentioning is it brings up other topics outside of that, and the conversations were so good. Especially and particularly the conversations regarding and surrounding mental health. I really, really liked. I thought they were very well done for the most part in regards to that topic. Not every topic was done, you know, wonderfully in my opinion, but that one was almost perfect in the way that it was presented. There was, you know, a really good, you know, peaceful relationship between this boy and his mental health, and he was, you know, working towards getting better, but he also knew what was going on. He was self-aware. It was very well put together in regards to the mental health thing, and I wish that was a little bit more on the forefront actually. But that's just personal preference. And then the other thing was that there was actually decent Christian representation for a change. So often in books, anytime there is representation of Christianity, I apologize if you hear in the background there is fireworks going on. So many times in literature, in books, when they have Christian representation or anybody who claims Christianity, it is villainized in the fact that they end up being bad guys in some capacity. And having a book that does not do that, it's a 3-star, but not because it's a bad book. It's just not a me book. And yeah, that's all I got for this one. It's just like probably the weirdest thing. But we're gonna move on because I've been rambling for too long about this last couple of books, and we're trying to make it shorter here. Alright, so the next one is a bedtime stories collection for kids. It is by Jessica Smith. It's a 2020 children's. I don't know where to categorize this specifically, but I did put it as fantasy on the list, although all of these have kind of a mixture of stories, so take that as you will. I did read this one digitally as a PDF for audio. As far as the synopsis, I didn't really put one. Basically, it's just a bunch of kids' bedtime stories. That's all you gotta know. Like, As far as dislikes, there was kind of a little bit of weird cultural rep in one of these. I think this was the one that had that there was like this one little section where there was a little bit of racial variety, but it was kind of a little weird, I think, on one of them. But I can't remember which one of the kids' bedtime stories books it was, because I did several of these collections all kind of within a couple of months, and so they all kind of have mushed together in my brain at this point. This one was a 3-star for me because it was kind of just middle of the road. It wasn't bad. It wasn't, you know, outstanding as far as the kids' books go. Next up, I have Plant-Based Meal Plan, and this is by Edith Bailey. It's a 2020 nonfiction adult, but it's not like specifically adult, but it's adult. It's a PDF for audiobook as well, and I did narrate this audiobook as well. In my opinion, I don't know, I didn't really like the title of this book. I know that's kind of a weird dislike, but to me, a title, especially of a nonfiction, is very important. You want your title to actually represent the main focus of the book. And to me, the meal plan topic didn't really fit, because honestly, this was just another recipe book. And then at the end it had like a meal plan section, which, let me be real, was not very fun to narrate. But as far as like the part before the recipes, like the topic wasn't necessarily super specific to actually making meal plans or anything. We're looking for some plant-based recipes. These are a great place to turn. They have a lot of different options, and some kind of like twists on classic types of meals that we're used to, so it makes it easy. A lot of them are very short to make, or, you know, it's just a little bit of prep time and then you let it do its thing, both of which are great options in today's world where we don't want to have to spend a million years on the actual making of the food. Sometimes we just want to like quick do the things and it be done, or put it together, let it sit for forever, and then we're good, you know. All in all, I rated this one 3 stars. Alright, so the next one was Bedtime Meditations for Kids Volume 2. This is by Anna Kelly, so this is a different set of bedtime stories from a different author, different publishers that I was working with. But this was also 2020 children's. I marked it as fantasy as well, even though it's, you know. And then again, PDF for audiobook. This set I loved even more than the previous one. This one was the one that was completely focused around Aesop's fables, and I really, really enjoyed that. They were written way better than the previous set. Like, the previous set was good for some of them, but then there were like a few that weren't so great. This set was like almost all really well written. Like, there were a few kind of towards the end there. Most of them were really good. This one I decided to put at a 4-star. I enjoyed it that much more. Next set is Valentine Brides by Terry Grace and Emma Morgan. I did forget to put the year of publication. I think it actually came out in ebook in 2019, and then in audio it just came out in 2020. I think it was 2019 when the ebook came out though. This is adult historical romance, but it is Christian fiction, so it's completely clean. It is a PDF for audiobook, is how I read it. Representation, we have disability and Christianity. And as far as the disability, we have various ones represented in this set. And I'll get into some of those in a minute. As far as trigger warnings, we do have attempted rape. I honestly can't really think of any other ones that are like more blaring. It's kind of hard when I'm doing the audiobook narration ones. I don't mark them as easily because I'm not just like sitting and reading and annotating. So it's a little bit different. I'm trying to figure out a good process for this, but we'll get to that someday. As far as archetypes, tropes, and themes, we have mail order brides. So I did narrate the audiobook for this, as I mentioned previously. So this is an omnibus. It has 5 stories in it. 3 of them are by Terry Grace and 2 are by Emma Morgan. All of the female protagonists are mail order brides, and all of them have disabilities. One who is deaf, one is mute, one is scarred on her face, one is crippled, and one has a stutter. A real dislike that I had was a love triangle, and that's legit my only real complaint, was that there was a love triangle for one of them, and it wasn't too bad. It could have been worse as far as a triangle goes. It just wasn't that good of a triangle, but it wasn't the worst love triangle I've ever seen either. But these stories, oh man, they were absolutely beautiful. And this particular book I did royalty share for, which basically means that I may or may not actually get very much revenue, and I may not, you know, even really break even on how much time I put in versus how much revenue I get. But I honestly don't care that much because of how much I absolutely adored working on this project. It's kind of like a love child for me. I absolutely adored it. It really helped me find a niche of what I enjoy and what I want to look for. I also would love to work with this publisher again, and just I really enjoyed working on these. I got to do voices, and they were easy for me because I'm from the South, and so, you know, it's not too hard to come up with various Southern accents for characters. Really enjoyed. I did give it 5 stars. Next book that I completed was Strange the Dreamer by Lenny Taylor. So excited to talk about this one. It is book 1 in the Strange the Dreamer duology. It is a 2017 YA fantasy story that I read or started reading during Voltathon. I didn't finish it until after, but we're not going to talk about that. I mostly read it during Voltathon, okay? I read more during Voltathon than I did after, okay? Let's go ahead and get into all the notes. So we have a diversity representation, we have orphan, we have religious, and I put ish because it's like a religion within the story, and it's not like a religion that exists outside of this world, but they are religiously connected. Some of the characters are religiously connected, okay? We have LGBTQ, and we have an amputee. Trigger warnings is a list. I'm gonna have to read it off. Okay, we have abuse, physical and verbal. We also have from parents, we have from guardians, as far as where that abuse is coming from. We have whippings, we have gambling, murder, especially of children. We have loss, especially of parent. We have being disowned or feeling unwanted. We have an absent parent. We have a child of rape, and then we also have suicidal thoughts. Controversial topics goes, we have some sexual content. It's kind of mild, it's kind of fade to black, so it's not too bad, at least in this book. Archetypes, themes, and tropes. We have libraries. There's this huge library that we're in for the beginning of this story. Exploration and adventure, searching. We have a lost city. The theme of what defines good and evil. We have unrequited love. We have dreams, books, languages, multiple worlds. The question, when is ignorance bliss? And how much power is in fear versus in being feared. Okay, so I am going to link the live show down below so you guys can go and watch me talking about this with the Voltathon host, as well as if I put up my Voltathon videos this past round, then I'll link that below too. Not this past round, but the round before that. Words. Okay. Synopsis time. Laszlo Strange, orphan and librarian, is obsessed with the mystical lost city of Weep. What caused the city to be cut off from the rest of the world 200 years ago? Who really is the Godslayer? And what is it that he slew? When an opportunity When an opportunity to answer questions arises, Laszlo discovers the answers are further away and more paramount than he ever imagined. Like goes, there are some redundant things throughout the story. There are some redundant things throughout the story and kind of like overly descriptive sections. Specifically, you know, she described people's lips as fruit. And honestly, the world was kind of hard to grasp at times. When I first started the book, I had like a stack of note cards that I was working with, trying to keep everything straight. So it was a lot to take in at first. Eventually, I kind of abandoned the note cards when I was in book 2, but all throughout book 1, I was like dedicated to them, hoping that they would help me to keep it straight. As far as what I liked, the world was absolutely beautiful and creative. The characters are wonderful. How complex everything is. How complex the characters are in particular. They all have layers to them, and I really love that. All in all, I did end up giving this a 5-star. I know that not everyone is going to, but I did. The next book that I read was My Lady Jane by Cynthia Hand, Brody Ashton, and Jodie Meadows. I was going to get Jodie and Brody mixed up. I had to read that off. This is book 1 in a companion series where they're not really actually like where you have to read them in sequential order. Because they're all completely unrelated as far as the characters go and everything. The only thing that's connected is the fact that they are retellings of stories or history in some cases. And the main female is Jane, and so and her name is Jane. So this is a retelling of Lady Jane Grey, a 2016 YA fantasy. Let's get into diversity representation. So we have Christianity, both Protestant and Catholic, and we have chronic illness as well as small stature, i.e. short rep. Okay, we got short rep. Okay, now let's get into trigger warnings. So we have terminal illness, being blamed for something that's out of your control, blood and bleeding, like, you know, back in the day when they medically would bleed you, cutting, betrayal, loss and grief, poisoning, cheating, Christianity misrepresentation. Okay. Controversial topics: men don't cry, sexism, and women's rights. Archetypes, themes, and tropes. I'm just gonna go ahead and pick this up now because I'm reading off of it and you guys already know that I'm reading off of it, so whatever. Okay, so we have poetry and poetry reading. We have pop culture references, an example being the song School's Out. I really enjoyed that one. Okay, we have a book lover character, and we have a character reading aloud to one another. We have a character that reads out loud to another character, which, goals. Actually, I already do that. Not just professionally, I also read out loud to my boyfriend. Okay, history, we have humor, miscommunicated. We have the miscommunication trope / the hiding the truth trope. We have the barely missed opportunities to solve everything. Like, you know, when somebody like just barely missed, you know, seeing the person that if they had seen each other that would have saved everything and fixed the whole problem, you know what I mean? Anyways, we have hate / indifference to love. We have slow burn romance. We have high stakes and equality of genders. Okay. So I think my synopsis for this is kind of long. Yeah, it's kind of long. Basically, this is a retelling of the story of Lady Jane Grey, who's also known as the 90s Queen. So yeah, that's right. She was only Queen of England for 9 days. In this retelling, rather than it being a focus on Catholicism versus Protestantism, i.e. Church of England, there is a magical twist. So you have Ethians, which represent Protestants, and Verities, which are equivalent to Catholics. So basically, there are characters that are pro-Ethian, or supporters of Ethian rights, and those people are also people that in the historical account were Protestant, and those who are verities within this version of the story were Catholics in the historical version. So just to kind of clarify what I mean by that. Athenians are people who turn into animals, by the way. Some people think it's a curse, some people think it's a gift, You get the idea. Okay, so the first portion of the book, all of the changes are made mostly relevant to that point of the magical twist. But in the second part, the authors choose to make changes to the story to bring their desired outcome and the story, so that the story would have the ending that they wanted. It's told in a really, really humorous tone. It includes asides and moments where the authors actually speak directly to the readers, things like that. Okay. Let's back up and talk about our dislikes first. Okay. Stay in order, Brie. Okay. There are a few characters and relationships that could have been developed a little bit further into, I feel like. But honestly, that's pretty much just me nitpicking. As far as likes go, I literally just put everything in all caps with an exclamation. I love the world, the writing style with the humorous like tone and the asides in there, the character and relationship developments, the plot changes. Oh my lord, I just want a million books like this. This is my everything. This is going on my favorites shelf. I have no complaints. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. It's history, and it's not, because it's magical, and it's like, you know, changing the story to how we would have wanted it to go if we had had our way. It's just so good. I adore it. It's probably not going to be for everyone, because not everyone's going to be into their writing style, I would think, because it is just so chill. It's such a chill writing style, and it's so funny, and taking, you know, the story, taking the history and twisting it into, you know, this magical story, and also twisting it into something, like to ending the way that they wanted it to, and just, it was so good. I loved this book. Okay, so the next book I completed was The Hunger Games by Suzanne Collins. This is the first book in the Hunger Games trilogy. It's 2008 release. Sorry, I almost said 2018. Not at all right. It is a YA dystopian. It was a reread for me. And I will talk a little bit more about this in a separate video. But basically, I was rereading this to read. It was my first time rereading the first two books, but I had never finished the series. As far as my rating for this reread, I rated it 3 stars. That I completed was Jane by Elaine Brosh McKenna, and the artist was Raymond K. Perez. This is a 2017 YA contemporary graphic novel. This I read during Dewey's 24-hour readathon. It is 224 pages. Okay, so let's go ahead and do diversity, representation, all that stuff real quick. So we have a drag queen, and we have orphan, we have loss of parents, a shipwreck, and coma. We have incest. As far as controversial topics go, we have incest. We have archetypes, themes, and tropes include orphans, retelling, Jane Eyre, nannying, and babysitting, as well as an artist character. Special notes being that this is another one of my Jane Eyre retellings that I was reading, that I have read leading up to me doing that whole thing. So, time for our synopsis. Jane Jane grew up feeling invisible, so she moved to New York City to follow her dream of studying art. Upon arrival, she secures a job as a nanny to a mysterious and powerful businessman in an apartment full of secrets. Pretty simple. Okay, so this book. I have a lot of thoughts on this one. Okay, so I'm just gonna go ahead and say this, that this really, really disappointed me. There were some major plot holes and changes to the story that should not have been made, in my opinion. Like, it made the story even more problematic than it was to begin with. And it was just so incredibly disappointing. Like, here are the two things that I liked. I liked the premise of, you know, New York, artist pursuing her dreams to go to this art school, and, you know, the babysitting position. Those things kind of had, you know, a start. But there were so many plot holes, so many stupid choices, that it kind of negated that good stuff, like the good idea, okay? But the one thing that could not have been negated was the art, which was gorgeous. I want to see more of this artist's work. I want to see if they've done any other graphic novels that, you know, were written better. I don't know. I was just so disappointed. And if you don't know, Elaine Brosh McKenna is actually a screenwriter mostly. She wrote Devil Wears Prada, among other things, but like, she did a good job with that. She didn't have big plot holes with that story. Why did she have to fail good old Jane Eyre and not give her what she deserved? Disappointed. Anyway, I sadly rated this 2 stars because, again, the art was amazing, the concept was there, the execution was just not. The next book that I completed was The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo. This one is another interesting one for me. A 2018 YA contemporary that's told in verse. This I also read during Dewey's 24-hour readathon. It's 360 pages. Okay, as far as representation diversity, we have a tall character, we have a Christian, we have Christians, specifically Catholic, we have Latinx, we have abuse, and we have LGBTQ, and we also have an interracial relationship. Trigger warnings, we have villainization of religion, specifically Christianity, sibling rivalry, harassment, drug abuse, and invasion of privacy, specifically a diary being read. As far as controversial topics, we do have profanity throughout the book. We have sexual content, self-stimulation is discussed, sex shaming, and premarital sex / teen sex as a topic. Okay, as far as archetypes, tropes, themes, we have poetry. The book is told in verse, and there's discussion of poetry throughout the whole thing. We have several siblings, specifically rivalry with siblings. We have self-discovery and self-expression. So, let's get into the synopsis. A young girl in Harlem uses poetry as a way to understand her mother's religion and her own relationship to the world. She's invited to join a slam poetry club. Can she manage to sneak away long enough to nurture her love of words? So, that's our synopsis. Alright, so as far as my thoughts on this one, it's kind of similar to how with The Hate You Give, or not The Hate You Give, kind of similarly to Anger is a Gift. I'm kind of a little bit conflicted on how to discuss this book. In some ways, it's hard to describe, but here's the thing. I, prior to reading the book, did not know what the topic really was about. I hadn't read the synopsis. I knew it was in verse, and that's all I could remember from what I had heard about it. And I was really interested in it. For the fact that it's called The Poet X, so it's about a poetry related topic, and it's told in verse. That's all I really needed to know to be interested in reading this book, okay? Okay, so dislikes. is the villainization of religion, of course, is not something that I really appreciate ever in literature. And specifically that there are a lot of things that are presented in the book about Christianity and regarding Christianity that are incorrect. Like things that if the character indeed grew up in church, then she would have known some of these, like the truth in some of these things, like rather than what she presented. Some questions, here's the thing, I don't have a problem with discussing a character who is questioning her faith or is questioning the faith of her parents. That's not a bad thing. The bad thing is when it's not done well. So it's like, if this character indeed grew up in the devout religious home that it's portrayed that she did, then there are some things that she says and does, or like some things that she says or thinks that don't make sense, because she would know the answer. And that really bugs me like a lot, because it just really bugs me, okay? And there is a lot of discussion regarding the topic of sex, and that's just not a topic that I'm a huge fan of discussing a ton of in a YA book. Because of the fact that it's YA, I just don't like that it's so prominently discussed, you know? Not my favorite topic for a book in general, but especially a YA book. Okay, so things that I liked. There are some gorgeous quotes. Towards the end, some of those things that I had issues with throughout the book, particularly regarding the religious things, there's kind of some balance to it in some ways. I don't know how to describe it without being spoilery, but basically some of the things are kind of balanced out in regards to one of the main things that was hard for me as a reader. I would be interested to see how I felt upon rereading this book, to see if, knowing that things are going to be balanced, if I can handle the things more throughout the book, if that makes sense. We do see some development in relationships and within characters, and there are some good things discussed as well in regards to the whole sex thing, to be honest. There are some good things, like, you know, stopping. That is a big thing that doesn't get shown enough in books and talked about enough, I don't think. So I appreciate that. So I give this overall a 3-star. Not because I think it's a bad book or anything. It's just not a super me book, I don't think, because of the topic, and my opinions and feelings on that topic, making it difficult for me to read. Also, at the beginning, there's like a lot of Spanish, and I don't speak Spanish, and it's not translated on page, and that kind of really bugged me, but thankfully that changed by the end of like the first third of the book, so it's all good. Finally to the last book. So the last book that I read was Why It's Sargasso Sea by Jean Reyes. Or Reese. It's Reese. Jean Reese. I'm sorry. Sorry. Okay. This is an experience. Okay. Alright, this is 1966 adult classic. I marked it as a classic because that's, I feel like, the best categorization for it. I don't know how else to describe it. I read this as well, almost all during Dewey's 24-hour readathon. And then I finished it the next day, but it was 171 pages. So as far as representation, diversity, we have racial, specifically Creole, and possibly bipolar, as well as what is listed in the trigger and controversial topics and things, and the archetypes and tropes. Some of those things could possibly be in this category. But anyway, we have depression, use of the N-word. I wanted to point it out. In the context, I don't think that it would necessarily be considered offensive in every single context, but there are contexts in which it is used offensively as well. And it's not the author saying it, it's a character saying it to another character, okay? That kind of thing. All right, being ignored, loss and grief of parent, of pet, and of children. We have suicidal thoughts, patient abuse, abuse of the mentally ill, cheating, use of weapons, and domestic violence. So lots of stuff going on in this 171 pages. As far as controversial topics go, we have lust versus love and money value, rich versus poor. Or the value of money for a rich versus a poor person. Okay. As far as archetypes, themes, and tropes, we have mental decay, being sold into marriage, and who is to blame for, demise of a relationship, demise of a person, blah, 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 whatever. Okay. Special notes, this is another Jane Eyre retelling one, but I don't think that's really a retelling so much as a continuation of the story. But in the past, it's like a prequel. So basically, as far as the synopsis goes, it's like the character Bertha and her mental decay, as well as how she came to be where she was, like some of it. I'm not going to go into any more depth because I don't want to give spoilers for Jane Eyre. If you're wondering, by the way, Jane Eyre, I will link down below my information on when I did my reread for Jane Eyre. I will link to the synopsis of that and like my discussion of that original story when I did my wrap up about it down below if you are curious for that. But so basically this is like not a retelling of Jane Eyre's story, but like a different perspective and part of the story before the events of Jane Eyre. Okay, so I'm very confused on my thoughts of this book, and I will tell you why. One, the writing style is very confusing, and I disliked that because it was kind of hard to get into, and the dialect is shown in the writing, and that's something that drives me absolutely nuts. It makes it hard for me to read sometimes, and I definitely had that in it. Honestly, I really feel like I just need to reread it to be able to get into it more. I think I need to reread it and possibly read it aloud to be able to get into it. There's not an audiobook for this book, so that's not an option, so I'm gonna have to read it out loud to myself, but I do that anyway, like narrator things that you do, you start reading out loud all the time, apparently. But there are some good quotes in it though, and honestly there is the potential that I'm going to enjoy it a lot more when I reread it because I think I'll understand it more. Honestly, I would really like to reread this and reread Jane Eyre, both. Like, I know I just reread Jane Eyre, but I kind of want to reread it again after I do all of these retelling rereads, or after I do all these reads and rereads of the retellings. I want to reread the original once more. I kind of do. I don't know, man. I don't know, okay? I just can't help it. I just feel like I need to like clear my head again. There's just so many things floating around and so many different versions of Jane in my head now. Oh, anyway, so overall I rated this 3 stars because I really didn't feel like it was fair to rate it down anymore based on the fact that I really just don't remember enough because I got so confused and I tried to read it in too short of a time span. That's the main problem, is rather than like a smart person realizing that the book wasn't working for me and putting it down during the 24-hour readathon, I was determined to push through, and thus was my demise and inability to complete the book. So that is it that is everything for March and April. Now I gotta go through and do all my reviews so I can do my May, June. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure to hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss my upcoming videos about the Hunger Games and my upcoming wrap-ups. I will see you guys as soon as I can with another video about the Hunger Games and all of that. And yeah, that's all I got for you. Peace out, Boy Scouts.
Look for the bare necessities, the simple bare necessities. Forget about your worries and your stress. I mean it, bare necessities. That's why a bear can rest at ease with just the bare necessities of life. Yeah, with just the bare necessities of life.